The Small Business Minister, Michaela Cash, has been under fire in Senate estimates this week. Labor politicians have lined up to quiz her about a 2017 leak from her office that alerted the media to an impending police raid on the Australian Workers' Union. The Federal Police told the committee that Senator Cash never gave them a witness statement, even though they asked for one. In response, Senator Cash said she did send the police a written statement and claims they never asked for more information. Here's a bit of the hearing.
I'm inviting you now to correct the record.
The request was on a voluntary basis.
So
I voluntarily provided a statement.
Right.
I'm waiting now for an apology from Senator Wong, Senator Watt and Senator Cameron, because even the interjections they were making last week in the Senate have now all proven to be wrong. Are you now going to apologise to me? The only person who now has questions to answer is Mr Shorten.
Please let me finish the question, Chair.
Well, you're not.
Please let me finish the question.
You've asked
Could
the
you
question.
please let me finish the question?
Well, you've asked the question.
Please let me finish the question.
Well, what is the question?
I'm seeking to do so, and I would be able to finish it if you could stop interrupting me.
Do you and I want to go down to the police station now and we can do it?
The hearing is
Making sure
suspended
you have a statement?
until 9:05.
Minister, you've been demoted, you've been humiliated, your credibility has been shredded. Why don't you just come clean?
I am a Cabinet Minister. I don't think Senator Cameron, and he does leave here in a matter of weeks, has ever had that privilege. He will actually never have that privilege.
Your evidence is in conflict with the Deputy Commissioner of the AFP. Do you want to correct the record?
Well, I don't believe my evidence is in conflict, Chair. The evidence I gave in October 2017 was the evidence I gave.
Chief Political Correspondent Laura Tingle's with me now from Parliament House. So, Laura, Labor is going pretty hard after Michaela Cash. Where is all that going?
I think it's basically going in the direction of creating as much noise as possible, Lee. We haven't really made a lot of progress in their quizzing of Michaela Cash, though there is the bad look around for her that she hasn't been turning up at estimates, and they've been making a big noise about that. The government argues that that's perfectly normal, that the duties of fronting at estimates are shared between ministers. The crucial questions here do go back to those points that were raised by the AFP and the DPP earlier in the week, which was this question of whether they would be able to prosecute this case if there were witness statements. Michaela Cash is insisting that she made one in the sense of providing the evidence she'd already given to the Senate committee in the past. That's obviously not going to satisfy Labor, but I think it goes to this broader question that the government's, that Labor's putting up this week in particular, which goes to the moral authority, if you like, of the government to govern the country.
OK, on another story, what is Hello World?
Hello World. It's for a lot of us, it's just a group that provides our travel arrangements if we ring up a 1-800 number. It's also a company that's run by a person who we discussed last night, is the Liberal Party treasurer. This story is developing, I think you'd have to say, Lee. It started yesterday, of course, with Matthias Cormann being asked about whether he'd paid for an airfare that he booked personally with the chief executive of Hello World, the tour company, by just ringing him up, and apparently it turned out he had never actually been charged for it. The story is now developed and embroiled Joe Hockey, the ambassador to the US, who is a major shareholder in the company. And the real question here is, it's all good colour and movement, but the real question is whether there's any evidence that emerges that coalition ministers or their representatives tried to use their connections to get a contract, a billion-dollar contract for government travel for Hello World. To date, we haven't seen direct evidence of that, but the coalition, the opposition is pursuing the issue further, and I'm sure more will emerge tomorrow.
Laura, briefly, there's just one more day of Parliament left before it rises. We've spoken about Labor's attack on Michaela Cash. What about the government? What is it focusing on?
It's countering with its own white noise, Lee. It's become a bit shambolic. It's about asylum seeker policy, attacking Labor on that. It's attacking the dividend deputation policy of the Labor Party. It's all pretty messy and not particularly well directed. So just a lot of white noise before we go into the parliamentary break.
Laura Tingle, thank you. And I should point out that we sought interviews with Michaela Cash and Matthias Cormann, but they said they were unavailable due to Senate estimates. One of the most disturbing trends when you look at surveys of Australian voters in recent years has been the erosion of not just trust in politicians, but also satisfaction with democracy as a form of government. Is it apathy, hostility, disappointment? And what does it mean for the upcoming federal election? Andy Park reports.
The hallowed halls of the University of Sydney have produced 7 Australian Prime Ministers, more than any other. If there was an engine room for tomorrow's political leaders, it's here.
So guys, thank you so much again for coming to our workshop for the Politics Society for 2019.
Not only are these politics students trying to produce the next PM, the bipartisan group are planning out a year of activities to engage young people in the forthcoming election.
Corey and I and Beth have done a little bit of brainstorming.
Like policy in the pub. Sort of stuff. And I think a lot of the reasons why people, especially youth, are disillusioned is that the issues that we're worried about aren't being addressed.
Especially since, the last 10 or 11 years of Australian political history, it is very, very, very divisive and whatnot, and it scares a lot of people off that could be really, really involved.
How do we target that? Well, I think it's going to come down to Welcome Week and grabbing that membership base.
We have the Entropy
Club President Bethany Pankhurst did join Young Labor, but left disillusioned.
I feel like Australian politics is very immature sometimes, and there's a lot more on the politicians as a person and them as a character than their politics themselves. And I think a lot of Australians don't like that and don't understand that and just are tired of it in general, and that mistrust is kind of built from, we're sick of hearing on the news that they're still fighting about climate change or still fighting about marriage equality when really we should have dealt with it and moved on.
Associate Professor Annika Gauger studies the decline of party membership. It's still the main pipeline for candidates to get elected, which she says results in even less diversity in Parliament.
So John Howard, former Prime Minister, was here at Sydney Uni at a time when party membership was at an all-time high, 4% of the electorate. These students here, things are quite different. So party membership is halved, now down to 2%. And so it's a real fundamental shift in the nature of politics.
This antipathy towards contemporary politics in this country is about more than just waning party membership. It's a pattern of mistrust towards government and towards democracy itself. And while young people, like those here at Sydney University, have perhaps long felt this way, this feeling is now felt by middle-aged Australians.
It's not necessarily baby boomers who are losing trust in government, it's Generation X. The Australian Election Study is a survey of voters across Australia after each election. We've been running it since 1987.
The study shows that while young people have always had low levels of trust for government, it's actually older Australians who have changed by becoming less satisfied with politics. It also shows that migrants from East Asia are the group most satisfied with our political system, that Australians in rural and regional areas are much less satisfied than city dwellers, and that blue-collar workers are the least trusting, whereas white-collar workers are the most satisfied.
The 2019 Australian election will be held in the lowest trust environment for a generation.
2 election years have been key to understanding this downward trend. Kevin Rudd's 2007 election win over John Howard was the last time our trust in government was high. It's been declining ever since. But at the other end of Howard's term, 1996, was the highest our trust has ever been since the study began. The question is, why was our regard for politics so high in 1996? A high point it's never reached again.
The government that I will lead will be a government not only for the people who voted for us, but also for the people who voted against us.
That year, at Canterbury Boys High School in southwest Sydney, at the very high school that proudly produced the incoming Prime Minister, the school captain was Ricky Simon-Juntak, who was about to become eligible to vote. Tracing his political attitudes helps explain this generational mistrust in politics.
My dad was really interested in politics, and funny enough, he was a Labourer, but he supported the Liberals. And I never quite understood that, having grown up with Bob Hawke and Paul Keating being very sort of powerful figures and very dominant at that time.
How do you think you'll vote in the 2019 federal election?
I have no idea. I don't even know who the candidates are, to be honest.
You don't know who is running in this election?
No idea. I stopped watching the news a long time ago. But when life takes over and you're doing a 10-hour shift in a warehouse, or like you're stressing over like simple family matters, you're not going to go and sit at the library and understand the complex nature of policy.
Listen in. Whether it's the behaviour of certain elected representatives,
Thank you very much. A lame joke.
or their deafness to certain voters, the end result is a malaise over political debate for many.
Oh, he's doing it! That's the man that should be running the country.
What we see with Ricky is a great example of someone who is, in their late 30s or early 40s, doesn't own the house that they live in, and we know that they have about the highest rates of mistrust in Australian politics. They're turning that frustration and that feeling of disenchantment on the political system.
And as the 2019 election looms, it's not the value of any one policy at stake, it's the value of our political system at large.
We might think about a voter like Ricky as being asleep. He's hibernating from the electoral process. We want the parties to go out and try to wake him up.
Andy Park report.